Doberman puppy was left at the bus stop
Hey there, little
with
one.
a note. What it said left everyone in tears. Bozeman was barely awake when I stepped out of the car. The kind of cold that eats through gloves and leaves a metallic taste in the air. I'd just parked near the bus stop outside the high school when I saw it something so small it could fit inside the fold of my jacket.
You're safe now, and I won't
A
let anything
Doberman
happen
puppy,
to you.
maybe 8 weeks old at most, curled up in the snow. Its fur was soaked, clinging to a body so thin I could trace each fragile bone beneath the skin. Ears drooped, eyes wide and glistening that look caught between confusion and surrender. Beside it lay a soggy scrap of paper black ink bleeding into the white. He's not worth living. I froze. The wind hissed through the street, lifting the note and dropping it right by my boot. No one bent down. A few passers-by stopped to take pictures. Some chuckled, others sneered. Look at that belly. Gross must be sick. Why keep that thing alive? Pitiful but pointless. Each word sliced through me like a blade. In an instant, my blood burned hot. Enough, I shouted. Don't you see he's hurting? If you were him. Freezing, abandoned, humiliated, could you stand it? Silence. Someone gave a nervous laugh and stepped back. Another walked away as if the scene were none of their concern. Only I remained staring at that trembling body breath so shallow they almost vanished. I knelt, my shoes pressed into the crusted snow as my hands shook forward. Hey, kid, you tired? When my fingers brushed his thin coat, it felt like touching a piece of melting ice. His body burned with fever, trembling violently. Each breath came rough and slow, his belly swollen and tight not from food, but from pain. A deep, lingering pain that drained life by the heartbeat. I looked at him, my throat locking tight. In those eyes I saw my wife 3 years ago, the day the doctor said she wouldn't make it. The same eyes, weak, resigned, yet still trying to believe someone wouldn't leave her behind. I slipped off my jacket, wrapped it around him, and pressed him to my chest. The cold cut straight through the fabric, but I didn't care. It's okay, I'm here now. He lifted his head slightly, eyes asking the question no one should have to ask. Am I worth saving? I didn't answer, I just tightened my grip, rose to my feet and ran toward the truck. The road was slick tires sliding over a thin layer of ice, wind whipping against my face. I drove slowly, one hand on the wheel, the other patting his fragile back. Hang on, buddy. Don't you quit on me. He wheezed, whimpered softly, his belly heaving. I could feel every shiver through my palms like holding my own heartbeat from years ago. When we reached the clinic, I slammed the brakes, flung the door open, and rushed inside. A young nurse looked up, startled, a soaked middle-aged man clutching a dying puppy. Sir, is he still breathing? Save him, please. I laid the puppy on the stainless steel table. Dr. Miller appeared, checking fast, his brow furrowing. His liver's enlarged, he said quietly. Could be congenital cirrhosis. If we don't act now, he won't make it through the night. My fists tightened. My wife's pale smile flickered in my head. My heart hammered loud, uneven, desperate. Do whatever it takes. Please, save him. The doctor studied me for a long moment, then nodded. We'll try. But you should know the treatment's expensive. I drew a breath, forcing the lump in my throat down. I don't care, as long as there's a chance. Outside the window, snow kept falling, flakes glittering under the amber streetlight. I stared through the fogged glass eyes, burning. No one. I whispered, no one has the right to say, a life isn't worth living. And right then I knew whatever happened next, I wouldn't let him die alone. After that snowy night, I returned home alone. The cabin, tucked deep among the northern pines of Bozeman, was so still I could hear the wind brushing against the wooden window frames. I hung my coat, still carrying the faint scent of the puppy, on the rack, and for the first time in years I saw my own hands trembling, not from cold, from the hollow ache that had just been stirred awake. 3 years ago, I sat in this same house watching my wife Laura fade away day by day in the chair by the window. Cancer took her left me with a silence heavier than any Montana storm. Since then, life had been a slow rotation of classrooms, cold coffee, and mornings that stretched on like an endless winter. I was living, but not alive. The next morning, the phone rang. Dr. Miller's voice came through the line. "Daniel the puppy." He made it through the night. "Still weak, though. Can you come?" I froze for a moment, then grabbed my coat and drove through the snow-covered road. When I arrived, I saw him, the same little Doberman now wrapped in a thin blanket, eyes half open, looking around. The doctor said his liver was badly damaged, maybe genetic, maybe from starvation. His belly was swollen with fluid, not food. Dr. Miller looked up, his voice low. "We're using specialized medication, but recovery depends on his body's response. I can't promise anything, Daniel." I just nodded. I didn't need promises, only hope. I sat in the metal chair beside the incubator watching him breathe shallow, uneven. Under the cold fluorescence, his tiny body looked almost breakable. I pressed my palm to the glass and whispered, "Hang in there, kid. I already lost one life. Don't make me lose another." That day I didn't go to school. I told them I had family matters. The truth was, I couldn't walk away from that little cage. I stayed the entire morning listening to the heart monitor beep, beep, steady and fragile like a prayer. By noon, the nurse brought me a cup of coffee. She glanced at me and asked softly, "Is he yours?" I shook my head, "No, but I guess he is now." By afternoon, the snow had stopped. I stood by the window watching the pale sunlight turn the frozen ground to gold. And it hit me, it had been a long time since I'd felt like I had a reason to stay. That night back home, I lit the heater in the living room and sat in Laura's old chair. Her photo rested by the fireplace, hair loose over her shoulders, that quiet smile, frozen in time. I looked at it for a long while before whispering, "You know, I met a little soul today. So weak, they said he wasn't worth living. But when I looked at him, I saw you, that look that refused to give up." The wind whistled through the cracks and the firewood popped and answered softly. I closed my eyes and pictured the puppy breathing in the hospital's warmth. I found myself praying not as a believer, but as someone too tired to stop hoping that somewhere goodness still existed. The next morning, I went back to the clinic. Dr. Miller smiled faintly. He'd eaten a little. A small thing, but an entire universe of hope. I sat beside him, reading a few lines from an old newspaper just so he could hear a voice. Every time I paused, those tiny ears twitched. I smiled and whispered, "I don't know if you understand me, but I'm here, and I'll stay until you're okay." As I left, I turned back. His eyes followed, no longer afraid, but trusting. A fragile kind of trust, real enough to make my chest ache. And right then I knew this wasn't pity anymore. It was the beginning of something far greater. By the third day at the clinic, the snow had stopped, but inside me the storm hadn't. Every metallic clang from the treatment room made me flinch. I never thought I'd find myself here sitting beside a tiny Doberman, fighting between life and death. Dr. Miller pulled the curtain aside and looked at me with cautious eyes. "Daniel, we've got the results. His liver is severely damaged, likely congenital cirrhosis. We're treating him with specialized medication, but his chance of survival is only about 30%. I swallowed hard. 30%, the same number the doctor once told me about Laura. 30%, and I'd lost that battle. Dr. Miller's voice softened. "If the medication doesn't work, we'll have to remove part of the liver. It's a risky surgery, and expensive." I said nothing. The white light reflected off the metal table, sharp as the edge of memory. I turned to Scout lying in the incubator head, resting on a thin towel chest, rising and falling. So small, yet there was something in his eyes that held me there, refusing to let me look away. "I don't care about the cost," I said quietly. "If there's even 1% of a chance, I'll take it." The doctor nodded slowly like someone who had also lost, and knew that this was no longer about money. That night, I stayed at the clinic. The overhead light cast a soft glow across Scout's tiny face. The monitor beeped steadily beside him, the heartbeat of a creature refusing to surrender. I leaned closer and whispered, "Listen, kid. You're not alone. I'm here and I'm not leaving until you're better." My hand rested on the glass, warmed by his breath. Scout stirred slightly. His eyes opened, deep brown, catching the dim light. Just a faint blink, yet it hit me so hard my chest ached. He'd heard me. I was sure of it. The days that followed became ritual. I came every morning bringing an old sweater for the nurse to place inside his cage so he could smell something familiar. Dr. Miller said he might be responding well to the medication. I didn't dare celebrate. I just sat there reading aloud from an old newspaper the way I used to read to Laura when she was too weak to speak. One morning, when I arrived, the nurse smiled. "You'll want to see this." Scout was trying to stand. His legs shook, trembling under the weight, but he pushed himself up, then fell again. I laughed through the tears that blurred my vision. It was small, but to me it was a miracle. I grabbed my phone and called Dr. Miller. "You see that? He's fighting." "I see it," the doctor replied softly. "And maybe Daniel, you're the reason he hasn't given up." I sat there a long while, the words echoing in my head, words Laura once said to me, "Daniel, don't be afraid to lose. Be afraid of not loving again." I lowered my head and whispered to Scout, "Maybe I was wrong, Laura. You were right. We never really die, not as long as we can still love someone." From that day on, I began to believe not just in the medicine but in his will to live. Scout didn't need pity. He just needed someone to stop to believe he was worth saving. Late that evening, I left the clinic. Snow had begun to fall again, but this time it wasn't bleak. Through the windshield, I watched the streetlights glint off the flakes like fragments of light. And somewhere deep inside, something shifted. Not fear anymore, but quiet anticipation. And in that silence, I knew if he survived, I would take him home. Not out of pity, but because both of us needed a reason to keep going. The first 3 weeks were the longest of my life. I barely slept. Every morning before sunrise, I drove to the clinic and sat beside the incubator where Scout lay breathing weakly, his tiny body trembling with each gasp. Every time I saw the IV line in his leg, something inside my chest twisted tight. Dr. Miller said quietly, "If he makes it through this week, his odds will rise a lot." I just nodded. We didn't talk much anymore. At the edge between life and death, words lose meaning. Only belief remains. I started forming strange habits. Each morning, I read the newspaper to Scout even though he couldn't understand a word. I placed my hand on the glass and talked about nonsense weather school, my mischievous students, the small things Laura once loved to tell me. Sometimes I told him stupid stories like the time I got lost in the woods at 17, and whenever I said don't give up, Scout would twitch slightly as if he heard. On Saturday afternoon, Bozeman was suddenly blanketed in snow again. I stayed there watching him try to lift his head. So slow, so weak, but he did it. I laughed before realizing I was crying. "Good boy, kid. You did well." The nurse walking by smiled. "You should record that. Maybe it's the start of a miracle." On the 20th day, Dr. Miller gave me news that nearly dropped me to my knees. His liver's responding to treatment. The fluids subsiding. He might live. I couldn't speak. I just gripped his shoulder. He might live. 3 words more beautiful than anything I'd heard since the day Laura died. That evening, when I left the clinic, I stopped by the bakery down the road for a hot coffee. The owner looked at me and said, "You look tired, but kind of happy." "Good news," I answered. "A small soul just won his fight." She didn't understand, but my smile did. 2 days later, the IV came off. Scout ate again. A small bite, then another, then an entire bowl of soft porridge. I reached out and brushed his head. For the first time since I'd found him, he touched his nose to my palm. That feeling, warm trembling, felt like pressing my hand against my own heartbeat. "Welcome back, Scout." The day he was discharged, Bozeman woke to soft sunlight. It shone through the melting snow scattering across the car windows. I opened the door, spread my old coat across the passenger seat, and laid him there. Scout rested his head on my hand, eyes half closed. Not the fearful look from that first day peaceful now. As we drove home, the wind drifted through the cracked window, carrying the scent of pine. I felt lighter, warmer. Every breath from Scout was a reminder that living isn't just existing, it's daring to believe that goodness still survives. Back at the cabin, I set him down on a blanket beside the fireplace and switched on the amber lamp. Scout curled up, fell asleep, his breathing slow and steady. I sat beside him, leaning back against the chair, watching the fire dance on the ceiling. "Laura," I whispered, "I saved him. Or maybe he saved me from the dark." Outside, the snow had stopped. A faint glow drifted through the window. I realized maybe miracles aren't loud or shining like in books. Sometimes they're just the quiet sound of a puppy's breath once deemed not worth living. I reached down and stroked his head. He shifted little paws, kicking at the air, murmuring in his sleep. I laughed softly. 3 weeks of fear, pain, and hope, all wrapped in this single moment. A life was saved. A heart reborn. "Sleep, Scout," I said. "It's over now. You'll never be alone again." From the day Scout came home to the cabin, everything around me changed, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly and truthfully. The house that once felt frozen now had breath. His tiny footsteps tapped softly against the wooden floor each morning, steady as the ticking of a living clock. Every morning I brewed my coffee and sat by the wooden table near the window while Scout curled beside the fireplace. When I folded the newspaper, he'd lift his head, those deep brown eyes meeting mine, as if he could read every thought I didn't say. Sometimes he'd yawn, then rest his muzzle on my knee, a silent way of saying, "It's okay. Stay a little longer." Bozeman was nearing the end of winter. The snow melted slowly, revealing damp brown earth and the faint scent of pine. I took Scout outside for the first time in weeks. His steps were still shaky, but his eyes were bright. Every time he stumbled, I caught him with both hands, hearing a small whimper that sounded almost like a child learning to walk. The neighbors began to notice. Mr. James, the man next door, who used to greet me with only a nod, now smiled whenever Scout ran around the yard. "She's a good one," he said. I just replied, "She's taught me more than I've ever taught anyone." In the afternoons, I trained Scout to eat on schedule, to take her medicine right on time. Her body grew stronger. The swelling in her belly was gone. Her black coat shone sleek, and the brown patches glowed under the sun. When I stroked her, she pressed her head into my palm, a small gesture, yet it made me feel alive again. One night, while reading, I heard a rustle by the door. Scout was chewing my old shoes. I started to scold her, but she looked up at me with guilty eyes, ears drooping, muzzle still clutching the shoe. I laughed, a real laugh, the first in years, echoing through a house that had only known silence. "All right, kid, keep it. Consider it your trophy." I realized that with each passing day, I thought less about what I'd lost. Scout didn't replace Laura, but somehow she made me remember her with a smile instead of tears. One morning I took her up the hill behind the house. The sun rose slowly through misted pines. Scout sat beside me. Little ears perked, gazing into the distance. I pulled out my phone and took a picture. That photo stayed with me, not just an image of a puppy in morning light, but proof of the first time I'd seen real light after 3 years of darkness. At noon, I sat down to write a few notes, an old habit I'd abandoned since Laura's passing. The first line read, "Day 12 of Scout at Home." She slept well, so did I. That night, I saw her dreaming. Her paws twitched, her ears flicked, and she made a soft whine. I sat on the floor and stroked her head. She opened her eyes for a second, looked at me, then drifted back to sleep. "It's all right, kid. You're safe now." Outside, the wind hissed through the pine trees, but it no longer sounded lonely. I leaned back in my chair watching the fire dance against the ceiling. Scout curled beside my feet, breathing steady and calm, the rhythm of a heart that had finally found home. And in that moment I understood happiness isn't about finding something new. It's about recognizing what you thought was lost peace. I whispered, like a vow. "They said you weren't worth living, but you're alive and you make this world better." "Thank you, Scout." The firelight flickered across her face and her brown eyes gleamed as if smiling. My heart softened, lighter, freer, that rare feeling I once thought I'd never know again. I thought every nightmare had ended. Scout was healthy, eating and sleeping peacefully within the warmth of her breath. But life never lets us stay at peace for long. One night in early March, I woke to a strange sound. Her breathing wasn't soft and steady anymore, it was fast, heavy, broken. I turned on the light. Scout lay on the floor, her small body curled tight, gasping belly swelling again. I rushed down, scooping her up. Her body was burning, heart pounding so violently it felt like it might burst. "No. No, please," I muttered. "Don't come back like this." Outside, a snowstorm was crashing into Bozeman. The wind roared through the pines, flinging chunks of ice from the roof. I wrapped Scout in my coat, opened the door. The wind slapped my face cold enough to sting my bones. I ran to the truck, turned the key, and the tires spun on ice. The road was a blur of white. Headlights sliced through the storm, scattering 1,000 blades of snow. I clenched my jaw, one hand gripping the wheel, the other pressed against Scout's chest where her heartbeat thrashed unevenly. "Come on, kid, don't leave me. We've come too far for this." Every time the truck skidded, I flashed back to that night, the one when Laura stopped breathing in my arms. Only this time I still had a chance to save something. When I reached the clinic, the clock read 2:37 a.m. The main doors were locked. I pounded on the glass, shouting, "Miller, it's me, Daniel. Open up." Moments later, lights flicked on. Dr. Miller appeared, hair tousled, robe half open, hurrying toward the door. "What? Oh my God." He took Scout from my arms and placed her on the exam table. The nurse rushed in, attaching monitors, inserting an IV. I stood against the wall, fists clenched white. The machine beeped fast and uneven. Scout's pulse was fading. I heard Miller mutter, "She's relapsing acute liver failure." "I'll do everything I can." I nodded, unable to speak. Tears fell, though I barely felt them. I just stared through the glass, a man who'd seen this scene before and knew too well how badly it could end. 15 minutes passed, then 20, then 30. Each second stretched into a lifetime. Then, slowly the beeps steadied. Miller exhaled, shoulders dropping. Her heart stabilizing, but she'll need time. This night's going to be long. I sank onto the metal chair, head bowed, hands locked tight. "Thank you, God," I whispered. "Please, don't take her away." When Miller stepped out, I moved closer to the incubator. Scout lay still, IV running, eyes shut tight. I placed my palm against the glass, voice trembling. "Can you hear me, Scout? I'm here. I promise I won't leave. Not ever again." Outside, the blizzard screamed against the windows. Inside, the room was warm and still. I remembered what Laura once told me. "Fear doesn't disappear, Daniel. It just steps back when you choose to stay." So I stayed all night, not a single step away. Every time Scout convulsed, I read aloud the passage Laura used to love most. "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." When the first light of dawn broke through the glass, I heard it a faint, steady breath. Scout opened her eyes. Exhausted, fragile, but alive. She lifted her head weakly and pressed her nose against my hand through the gap in the cage. I broke. My tears fell onto her paw as I whispered, "Good girl, kid. You did it. You're still here." Miller entered smiling softly. "She's going to make it, Daniel." Again, I looked at Scout, overcome by something I couldn't name, maybe grace. In this life, at least once I had witnessed what people mean when they say a second miracle. When I stepped outside, the storm had passed. The snow was still untouched. Dawn spilled across the distant mountains, glinting like silver. I lifted my head, drew in the cold air, and felt a strange calm inside me. "Thank you, Laura," I whispered. I finally learned how to believe again. A year had passed since that blizzard night. Bozeman had stepped into spring, the snow melting away to reveal soft brown earth and the faint scent of young pine drifting through the wind. I still lived in the same old cabin, only now it wasn't empty anymore. Every morning, when the first light slipped through the window, Scout would place her paws on the edge of the bed and nudge my shoulder the way a loved one might wake you gently. I made coffee, opened the porch door, and she would sprint around the yard chasing sunlight and birdsong. Each time I watched her run strong and fearless, I remembered that winter morning, the day people said she wasn't worth living. Now she lived more radiantly than any creature I had ever known. She'd grown tall, lean, her black and tan coat shining like polished bronze. But what moved me most wasn't her strength. It was her eyes, always following me quietly, carrying something unmistakably human, gratitude and love. I started bringing Scout to school. The students adored her. They'd shout, "Hey, Mr. Cole's hero dog." Whenever a child seemed sad, Scout would walk over, rest her head on their lap. Gentle, wordless. I remember one boy whose father had just died. He sat in silence for days. Scout simply sat beside him, didn't move, didn't bark, and the boy began to cry. Not from grief, but from finally feeling understood. I realized then some beings are born not to speak, but to listen. And sometimes it's their silence that heals the deepest parts of us. In the afternoons, I often took Scout to the old bus stop, the place where everything began. It looked different now, no more snow, just dry ground and tender blades of green grass. I sat on the same wooden bench and Scout lay beside me, head resting on my leg. In my hand I still held that piece of paper now yellowed with time, the words still faintly visible. "He's not worth living." I folded it carefully, slipped it into my wallet, and stroked Scout's head. "They were wrong, kid. You weren't just worth living, you made everyone around you live better." The spring breeze swept softly through her fur, making it shimmer like silk. I thought then maybe God hadn't sent her for me to save her, but for her to teach me how to believe again. Believe in kindness, in redemption, in a love that doesn't need words. That night when Scout curled up asleep beside the fireplace, I looked around the room. The place, once filled with emptiness, now breathed with life. On the wall hung the photo I'd taken of her at sunrise, and every time I looked at it, I saw myself there too, thinner scarred but still standing. I sat down, placed my hand gently on her head, and whispered, "Thank you, Scout. You reminded me that love doesn't need language, only the courage to stay." She stirred, wagged her tail in her sleep, her lips parting in what looked like a dream of a smile. I looked up at Laura's picture on the wall, the sunlight catching her face, making it glow softly. "You see her, don't you, Laura?" I whispered. "She saved me." Outside, the Montana mountains bathed in the gold of sunset. Warm light filled the small cabin, wrapping everything in peace. I took a sip of coffee, glanced down at Scout sleeping by my feet, and smiled. And I thought, if someone out there ever sees a fragile life and thinks it's not worth saving, please stop. Kneel. Reach out. Give it a chance. Because sometimes what you save isn't just an animal. It's the part of your own humanity you thought was gone. If you've stayed till this point, thank you. Not because this story is mine, but because you chose to stay and listen to the rest of a small soul's journey. Once the world said Scout wasn't worth living, but every breath she takes, every step she walks, is the loudest argument against that lie the world will ever hear. Today, she's strong, running free beneath the Montana sun, and every time she looks at me, I remember something simple. True love doesn't need words. It only needs someone to stop, reach out, and whisper, "You deserve to live." If Scout's story touched your heart, please help me share it. Like, comment, and share so that somewhere out there, someone standing between walking away and saving a life might understand that one small act can change 2 lives forever.